Hello and welcome to Soul Whisperings vlog. We have a special guest today that I am super excited about. And this is vlog number 10. And this is Michelle Steiner. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Monica. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I am so excited for this conversation. So and this is very intriguing to me. You have an invisible disability, is what you
Hmm.
wrote, and that you have published articles on the Mighty, on the Nonverbal Learning Project, Dyscalculia Blog, the Reluctant Spoonie, Imagine the World as One magazine, and Word Gathering. Your photographs are featured in Word Gathering, Independent, and Work Ready, and you work as a paraeducator in a school with students with disabilities. You live in Pennsylvania with your husband and two cats. So this hits home for me because I spent 27 years in the classroom. And so I am so inspired by your story. You want to share a little bit about how you came to be where you are at? And
I would love, yes, I would definitely love to. My story began whenever I was diagnosed, whenever I was in kindergarten. I was really lucky that my teachers saw that I was really struggling in the classroom. I was my parents' first child, and they didn't quite know what to base typical childhood development on. I had a preschool teacher that thought something was going on as well, but they didn't have a lot of the early intervention services that we do now. So my parents decided that, okay, we're going to send her off to kindergarten. And when I was there, I was really struggling with math, visual perception. Dot to dot pages were something that was really hard for me. I can remember I would do a paper and I thought, oh, I did this perfect. And when I got it back, it was incorrect. I struggled with tying my shoes. And I also struggled socially because being an only child, I was around a lot of adults. So I didn't have a lot of that social interaction. But the teacher recommended that I get tested for having a learning disability. And sure enough, they called my parents in for a meeting and said that I was indeed learning disabled. And at that time, the only thing that they put everything with learning disability as an umbrella term. It wasn't specific learning disability that we do now. And the only thing that they really knew at that point was I wasn't going to be a mathematician. The school psychologist explained to my dad that I was never going to really understand how numbers work. And my dad's really good at math, so this was a little hard for him to understand. But even at that young age, they really didn't paint a very bright picture for what my future was going to look like, because it definitely didn't look very promising for a lot of things. And I can remember I had to repeat kindergarten the following year in a new school, and I had specialty instruction, and I was really frustrated even with that. I just wanted to learn like my peers did. I didn't want to have a disability. I thought life was always going to be really hard academically and socially. And I can just remember being really frustrated. And my teachers, I did have some good ones in the very beginning. They didn't want me to have learned helplessness. In fact, one of them wrote on a report that they have to encourage me to do more things, because sometimes whenever I would struggle with something, I would surprise myself by being able to do it right.
Mm.
And that's something my parents always really encouraged, that I didn't have to have perfect grades. I didn't have to have a lot of everything going right, but I had to try. And that was a big thing. And eventually the specialty instruction started to work. I had it in all areas in the beginning, and slowly it did begin to work for me. I was able to be in regular ed classes, starting with reading and science and social studies. And I still had the accommodations of having the test read aloud to me and having extra time on tests to give my brain that extra time to process information. And from the very beginning, it was a struggle socially. I can remember I went to a very small school district, so everybody knew that I went to learning support, and I was lumped in with all the learning support kids. But most of my learning support peers, they struggle more with reading and some behavior issues. So I didn't really feel like I fit in with them. And I certainly, the regular ed peers didn't think that I fit in with them as well. So it was really hard. In the beginning, it was more just, okay, you didn't get invited to a birthday party, or someone didn't want to be your friend or play with you on the playground. But it got really hard for me as I went throughout school when peer groups became more defined. School, on the other hand, academically got easier. I was in all regular ed classes by the time I got to high school, except for math and for a resource room. And I was making honor roll. I was doing very well in all my classes. And we were trying to figure out what I wanted to do after high school. I knew that I wanted to go to college, but I had my reservations because I knew how difficult it could be with math. That was the biggest fear. And I was doing so well in all my other classes. I just wondered how I was going to be able to perform. And I can remember I wasn't alone in that. I had a learning support teacher who told me, I don't think you can go to college because of your math difficulties. So she recommended a trade school. And nothing there interested me. I think if they would have had an early childhood program, I would have been in there in a heartbeat, but they didn't. And I was lucky that I did have people that encouraged me. I had a place, Office for Vocational Rehabilitation was an agency that really helped out with, making sure I was going to have the accommodations and writing out a lot of the plans of things that I was going to need when I left school. And I also had a student teacher that told me that I could go to college because I knew how to study. And sometimes those were the voices that played in my head when I did get to college and things were really hard. I can remember with OVR, I had to get tested for a learning disability again. And I'm not a great test taker, never have been. And whenever I took the test, my scores were extremely low. And I can remember the psychiatrist putting on my first report, most likely won't go beyond a community college. And yeah, and just hearing that was so discouraging to me. And then when I got to community college, I can remember I had an advisor that told me, well, you're going to have limited job choices. So that was also hard because I worried about my future. And then I had peers that thought that using accommodations was cheating. So I didn't use them, and that was a big mistake. My grades really dropped. And it wasn't until I was in a science class and I was really struggling, and I was talking to my professor, and she said, why don't we at least get you extended test time? And I got the extended test time. I passed her class. I didn't do well, and I used it for other classes. And I was able to graduate with an associate's degree in early childhood education. And I was able to move out on my own, which was really key because I couldn't drive. I can't drive because of my disability. And having that central location gave me that independence. And during that time, I was doing temp jobs in some early childhood places. And I loved doing that, but I always wanted more for myself. And I guess be careful what you wish for, because due to financial reasons, I had to move back in with my parents. And I just thought I was at a job, and the job was downsizing, and I just thought this is the right time to go back to school. And I said, I just have to try. And I found a program at our university that had the least amount of math and science possible, had a program that dealt with the service end of special education. And this time it also had accommodations, and I went in and I did all the accommodations that were recommended. I had a note taker, I had extended test time, I had tutoring, but I also advocated for myself. And when I did that, my grades improved dramatically. And I was able to graduate. I made Dean's List for a semester, and I was able to graduate with a bachelor's degree, despite being told I couldn't do that. And after school, it took a while to find the right job. A lot of places that claimed they were disability friendly weren't the most disability friendly. And eventually I went back to what I was doing before, working in a school as a paraeducator. And I found that to be more rewarding after I had that degree, because now I get a chance to encourage other students. And another thing I did after school was writing has always been big in my life. It was the first thing that I found that I was good at. And I can remember I wrote a story about a dinosaur. My dad really liked it. And from that point on, I wrote a lot of things. And I can remember I joined a writers group. And I joined one as a teenager. And whenever that one, stopped meeting, I eventually joined another one with adults, just a couple years older than I was as a teenager. And we still meet 20 some years later, once a month.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I can remember I had a friend that encouraged me, you really should write about having a learning disability. And I thought, oh no, that's too personal. Don't want to go there. And I wrote some bad poetry and some other really awful things at that point. But when I finally got enough courage to write about my struggle with limited hand dexterity and I got it published on the Mighty, that's what encouraged me to go out there and write more stories about my life with a disability. And I started my own blog called Michelle's Mission. And I also started with photography too a few years ago. A lot of times if I'm in the car, I can't drive, but I get a better view because I'm in the passenger seat. Or I'll be in the car saying, okay, my husband, did you see that? And he said, no, I'm focused on the road. And I'll get a chance to go back and take a picture of that flower. And if I'm on a walk, and if I wasn't walking or if I was driving, that's something I would have missed.
Mm. Oh my goodness, there's so much to your story that I just want to like dig into some of this. So I'm interested in like, it feels like you've got these two, conflicting voices of who do I listen to? Do I listen to the person who wrote in a paper about me from the test that I took that says I'll never graduate from college or community college? That's okay. And like, I can relate to that, myself, but I can also relate to it in my students. And, we talked a little bit before this vlog, I used to have students who struggled writing, right? And getting out their thoughts. And so I would just sit and say, I don't care if you can't write it. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your ideas. And it's like you've moved past some of those voices of people who told you, like, no, you can't do this. And then you stepped over and said, yeah, I can. And that just, I don't know, that's just so exciting for me. So personally speaking, I could really relate to some of those, getting back that paper that you thought you did so well. And so like I flunked a writing test in college.
Wow.
Like, and it was so bad that like I hated to teach writing because of that experience. I mean, I can see the red pen all over the paper. I went and had to meet with her. I flunked this exam. I couldn't get my degree. I couldn't get my teaching license without this test, right? And so like it scarred me like for my whole life. And then at the age of 50, I published my first book. But I was so scared to write this whole time because I thought like that determined who I was. And I didn't have, like you said, like, you've got these people telling you this, but then you had so many cheerleaders, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Like, tell me about those cheerleaders and how did you override, those negative messages to get to those, those cheerleaders cheering you on?
Well, my first cheerleaders were my parents, definitely. They have always supported a lot of the stuff that I've done, and they never gave up on me. And they could see the good things that I could do, what I could do. And I had a lot of I did have some good teachers, especially in the beginning, and they were able to see the things I was good at. They would write encouraging things like on some of my reports. Oh, Michelle reads with such expression. Please encourage her to read aloud more. I mean, those were things that they could be able to find that I could do. And I had wonderful friends. They couldn't fix my disability, but sometimes I can remember I was going through a really hard time at a college class, and one of my friends got me a cheap Harlequin romance novel or something, and just to make me smile about, and we just laughed over this book, and just the time that we got to spend together hanging out on the weekends, that really made the difference too, because they couldn't go in and change my grade. Neither could my parents, but they could be supportive, and they could just be really just help me out in that regard, and just encourage me too, because sometimes that's what I needed, was that encouragement. And sometimes just some of the resources that were out there too, just being able to find places that had accommodations, schools that had that, understanding people, and that just made all the difference in the world.
I love that. So I really like what you just said. Um, your cheerleaders and yourself, you looked at
Mhm.
what you can do versus what you couldn't do.
Mhm.
That is so interesting, because you're saying like, okay, I can't drive, like, like
Mhm.
that's a kind of like some things that we take for granted, right? Like,
Yeah.
most people can drive, right?
Mhm.
But you're saying, oh, I can't drive, but oh, I get to look around and I see things from a different viewpoint. Like everything that you're going through, you're seeing it through a different lens, right?
Definitely. I get a chance to look at my neighborhood, and there are flowers that bloom in the spring. There's ones that bloom in the summer. And I get that chance to look forward to them every time they come up. And then sometimes there's new things. Sometimes I'll go for a walk in a new neighborhood and I'll get to see a new flower or something new that comes up. Or my husband and I, we love to travel. So we go to gardens and we go to different places. And there's just always something there. And whenever I get that chance to look around, I get that chance to stop and smell the roses. I don't let that pass me by. And that just makes all the difference in my life, to be able to take all that in. And it just gives me a different perspective.
I love that. Um, so you're advocating for people with disabilities.
Mhm.
Tell me more about that. What does that look like?
A lot of times, when my role for advocating for people with disabilities, it depends on where I'm at. If I'm at the school, I get that chance to tell students that it's okay to have a disability, and I get them that chance to be able to use their voice. A lot of times it's like a recording of myself at that age. I hate my disability and I wish I didn't have it, and I get that chance to say it's not a bad thing. uh, a lot of times they'll say, well, I'm stupid because I have a learning disability. And I get to tell them, well, I have a learning disability too. It just means your brain's wired differently. And sometimes they're surprised. You mean you do? And I'm like, yes, I do. And also, it's educating maybe students who don't have disabilities. Sometimes I'll hear other students say, well, I wish I had a disability because they're lucky they get to do this. And I say, everybody has things that they struggle with. And it might seem like it's a lot of fun until you get in a situation. And that does really make it hard for them. And I think that it's just showing empathy is really big, because I know how my students feel. On my blog, I get that chance to advocate by just being myself and sharing what my life has been like with a disability. Everybody's going to have a different experience, but I get that chance to share what that is.
That's amazing. How can people find your blog?
I'm at michellesmission.net.
michellesmission.net. Okay, I'll make sure to put that um in the notes. So so yeah, so how does your work now kind of I know you've kind of talked about it, but how does it align with your soul? Like how does your soul feel really connected to this work?
I feel very connected to this work, because sometimes it can be really easy to think, oh, I have a disability. I can't do any. How can I really help other people that have them? I can remember particularly whenever all the kids know, don't ask me for help with math. And sometimes when I'm in classes and we are presented with math things, it can be really hard for me. And I just remember being really frustrated. I was in a class, they had a math concept. It wasn't a direct math class, but it had some math in it. And I just looked over and I said, why am I in this class? Why am I doing this? I have this disability. This isn't what I wanted. And I turned over and somebody said there was a student that was crying because he was frustrated because he couldn't get it. And I had that chance to get down on eye level with them. And I told him that I know how hard it is with math. And if he has any questions to let me know. I can't help you with it, but we can get the right resources. And just that little voice said, see, this is why I put you here. It wasn't to teach this person math, but it was to help that person today. And I chose you to do that.
I love that. And I love what you said about brain wiring.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was working with a student this summer. I still do some private tutoring, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, she has dyscalculia, and I said it just means that your brain's wired a little different, and it's
Yep.
okay. Like, you know, we'll work through it, and we'll get as far as you can. And you know, I'm going to look at it at different angles. So in math, I was always the one like trying to figure out like what I would zero in on what they're like in the, you know, math is very linear, right? Step
Yeah.
one, step two, step three, like, and
Right.
kids would like skip over step two. I would be able to find the hole that would, you know, I considered them like potholes, like, and that, you know, I could fill in that hole so they could get step number two and figure out like where their wiring was going a little astray. But
Awesome.
this has been super fun to talk to you, and I hope that somebody out there is inspired to know that your soul has a journey here and that you are just, I don't know, I get this like riding this wave, like that it hasn't always been easy for you, but you've persevered, you've had your cheerleaders behind you, and that you are doing this work to, you know, support others so that they don't feel, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like you did, or you know, maybe they don't have the cheerleaders and you're going to be their cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
So I am so inspired by your story, and I wish you the best.
Oh, thank you so much, Monica. It's been a pleasure.